Greetings, Dr. Joseph Martin. Part 2 of 2. The thin veneer of civilization and the redemption of our aggressive or depraved nature as we might have it. Now, first off, I'd like to say that I've been studying the issue as a psychological anthropologist, and I am a psychologist as well, and a social cultural anthropologist for 45 years now. I spent my entire life thinking about this, training in universities and on my own, teaching at universities, several in Canada, and also my own university or academy. And stay tuned for an upcoming e-university that I'll be setting up shortly in the next few months. Now, we've only had psychology in this world historically for about 140 years, and that's not long at all. And I want to focus on the issue of war and peace in society and how come there is so much discontent in society and how actually culture in society in the beginning, when small groups of people going way back in our archaeological history started to come together. How did culture and society come about? What are the underlying issues about it? And I'm going to start with somebody very significant, and that would be Sigmund Freud. I'm going to use him as the analysis of the structure of the problems of culture and society and why there's so much devastation, war, and murder. And then for the solution, I'm going to go to Dr. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, whom many of you know about. And that's the subject of my previous first part of this two-part video. Sigmund Freud was living during the time prior to the First World War and up until 1939. And as a Jewish psychiatrist in Austria, obviously, he died just at the beginning of the Second World War. And you understand the challenges that the Jews, psychologists or otherwise, were having at that time. And also, of course, Carl Jung was living during the First World War. So a lot of their theories and analyses and solutions come as a result of living in Europe and witnessing the absolute holocaust of tens of millions of people and trying to understand what is it in human nature that makes men and women do this. Well, according to the Civilization and its Discontents, which is the last and greatest book of Sigmund Freud, according to my own analyses, and a book I've used often in teaching, I'm going to read you a little bit here. Let me just start by saying that he suggests that the structure of the human personality is such that on one side we have aggression and the death wish, the need to kill and destroy everything around us, which is obviously both masochistic and sadistic as well. And on the other side, we have the Eros wish, or the capacity to love and be kind and sharing and supportive. Now, obviously, these two competing issues are at complete opposites or odds with one another. And so we have the death wish and we have the Eros wish. We could call the death wish also the need for hatred and killing, and the Eros wish, the need for love and connection. Now, many of you probably find this in your own relationships, but certainly on a social, cultural, historical level, this is how it is. And I'll just read the conclusion of Freud's book, Civilization and its Discontents. The fateful question for the human species seems to me to be whether and to what extent their cultural development will succeed in mastering the disturbance of the communal life by the human instinct of aggression and self-destruction. It may be that in this respect, precisely the present time deserves a special interest. Men have gained control over the forces of nature to such an extent that with their help they would have no difficulty in exterminating one another to the last man. They know this, and hence comes a large part of their current unrest, their unhappiness, and their mood of massive anxiety. And now it is to be expected that the other of these two heavenly powers, meaning love or Eros, will make an effort to assert itself and the struggle with this equally immortal adversary, but who can foresee with what success and with what result? And this brings up the fact that we all know intuitively and through our life experience and through history that this is the case with us as individuals and the case of us with every society and culture known to history. And in this process, we're now moving over to Dr. Carl Jung, who has this notion of enantiodromia. It's a lovely Latin word which simply means this: when you go too far with one way or one side of the opposites or the complementaries of every part of human nature, and we're rife and structured with all kinds of opposites. In fact, because we have two brains and we're a spiritual being and an animal being, everything is opposite and trying to vie for prominence. Enantiodromia for Jung suggests that when you go too far one way, the other side will immediately, unconsciously on its own, without any kind of undue support or consciousness, it will just take over the other side. So when we strive too much towards peace and love, the death wish and the other side wants to take over. And likewise, with love and hatred in personal relationships, you've probably already experienced that in your own personal relationships. So to avoid enantiodromia, where one side takes over the other side, when we strive too much for peace, war is going to happen. And when we're too much at peace, or too much in war, everyone wants to strive for peace. There's only one answer, and that's the middle path, as the Buddha found, and as the Taoist spiritual tradition suggests, the middle path between the yin and the yang, as it were, the love and the hatred, the peace and the war, the striving for death and killing, and the striving for life and immortality. The middle path holds the tensions between the two sides, and that's what Jungian psychology needs to and does bring us the solution to our personal individual strife within ourselves and our interpersonal social reality. Holding the tensions between the two sides is the only resolution and redemption. And there needs to be a resolution and redemption both personally and collectively. And that's the point of this video. Now, I'd like to suggest that, if you're involved in the peace movement, as we all are, that you need to study Jungian psychology and you need to engage upon the process of Jungian analyses to work with all this. And remember, I'm just going to kind of recap a little bit from the last video and add a little bit, hopefully, as well, that when you're doing dream work and dream analysis, the figures of your same sex or gender are the figures of your shadow. It's always someone of the same gender as yourself. And you need to work with the opposite side within yourself. We all would like to think that we're decent, loving, kind, compassionate people. And if that's who you are in the outer world, you need to deal with the opposite side of yourself inside, which would be the murderer, the mass killer, the inner Hitler, or Stalin, as I used to call it within myself. And I still take charge of that now, because we all have the potential or possibility to let that dark side rule, which is why Star Wars is the greatest movie, archetypal movie on the planet, and has so many different series to it, and people resonate with the truth that we both have the light side and the dark side, always fighting, whether with lasers or just in our own conscience, and so on. So the middle path then is the path of conscience. And that's what's literally missing when people move into a place of being a sociopath or a psychopath, or into a place of being warmongering and actually dropping bombs on innocent civilians. We, as Viktor Frankl says, we anesthetize the conscience hidden within our inner world or our shadow, and we obliterate or we bomb the heck out of our conscience, and therefore we have no guilt or shame about killing other people. And now this is the whole point, because when you are being an aggressive, narcissistic, psychopathic kind of person, either as an individual or as a nation, then the issue becomes one of how do you deal with your guilt and your shame and the embarrassment. The only way is to deal with this in an open, vulnerable way and talk about this and have truth and reconciliation, which is a whole movement worldwide for indigenous peoples who've been projected upon. We as so-called the Western world, shall we just say, we like to project our shadow, because if we project our shadow, we don't have to do any inner work. But we project our shadow on women, gays and lesbians and transvestites and queers. We project our shadow onto the Chinese, the blacks, the First Nations, the indigenous people, any of these people, and there we make them wrong, we make them judged. And the religious right, whether in America or the rest of the world, they don't deal with their shadow at all, and they're very unchristian and unloving in the way that they have such vehement, violent tendencies and hatred towards other people, races, orientations, and religions. This is why civilization is so discontented, and why we are seemingly working towards another violent worldwide third world war that is seemingly imminent, probably within the next few years or decade or so. As a psychohistorian, I can feel it and see it and sense it. Now, I've always said that the Third World War is in the inner heart and conscience of every one of us. And when we can deal conscientiously and openly in a very kind of vulnerable, honest, truth-speaking, truth-telling way that this is my human nature as well as the true human nature of other people, we can work at our dark side. We can work on our demonic side. We can work on our potential for evil, because it is within every single one of us. And as Viktor Frankl has very clearly said near the end of his life in the 1990s, that there is a potential Holocaust coming in every nation and culture and religion of the world, not just the one nation that was there in the Second World War. It's in every individual, it's in every culture and society and nation and ethnic group. And we need to realize that my favorite saying of Jung, and I have thousands of them because he's one of my very favorite people, is we are the origin of all coming evil. Now, he said this in 1961, shortly before he passed over, and he had visions and dreams of a great nuclear holocaust that would be worldwide. Now, this was 53 years ago, and it still seems imminent. The only thing that can assuage it or diminish it is what I'm suggesting as a solution. It takes one individual with enormous courage and strength and dedication, determination, and willpower to go into therapy to heal the shadow within themselves. And then, as I'm doing, to share it with the rest of the world and other individuals and groups as a format, a solution to a peacefulness that can be enduring. Hopefully there will be enough people now in the future, in the 21st century, in the 22nd and 23rd centuries, enough young people of the new generations that have the intellectual, psychological awareness and adeptness to do this healing work with themselves and with one another, to create a whole new society. And this is sounding utopian, but I realize how much hard work this is, where we can be in charge individually and in neighborhoods and collectively of all the differing kinds of emotional, psychological, instinctual energies, that we can take charge of the death wish on one hand, and the life wish, and the aggression, and the compassion, which are on opposite sides, and the narcissism and selfishness and envy and greed, and the non-judgment and the selflessness and the compassion and service, or seva as we say, and sharing. And bringing the two together energetically and holding the tension between the opposites is the source of our life force, our energy, our path, our soul, our heart, our life. This is actually biological and anatomical. For in the yogic meditation tradition, which is now absolutely worldwide, we have three channels. And this is also in the mysto-kabbalistic tradition. The three channels is the left column and the right column. And in the central column is the one where the two come together. So the energies of the feminine, masculine, the dark and the light, the yin and the yang, as it were, all come together in the central channel. And this is a conscious, psychological, moment to moment process where you learn to be in charge. Now, in the analytic process, this is going back to the individuation process of moving towards wholeness and truth and authenticity and true identity as a human divine being. You can see this in our book, Traveling Light, which was from a year one of a 4-year training course in how to be individuating yourself. And we can see that the path is this, that you can take charge of your life and you can find that fulfillment and that meaning and that purpose and that joy and creativity, that life-giving reservoir of a fountain of youth, as it were, a fountain of life inside you, a fountain of integrity, honesty, truth, respect, kindness, beauty, joy, love, unity, wholeness, growth, evolution. All these things can come to you when you are engaging on this process. I'm hopefully inspiring you to do this process and to share it with all the others in your neighborhood, in your family, in your community, your children, your fellow students, those of you who are in the business world, wherever it may be. But take a humble approach to this whole process with yourself. This is extremely essential to yourself. I'm just going to take a moment here to make sure that I've covered all the things that I wanted to cover with you. Now, on a personal level, as I mentioned previously, the meaninglessness, the depression, the suicidal thoughts, the boredom, the addictions, the obsessive compulsiveness, all the things that are so part of your whole life as you're experiencing it now will be healed, will be ameliorated as you continue to do this shadow work. Carrying on here, I just wanted to say again that I've spent my entire life working on myself. It's such a joy. Yes, I've spent a lot of time and effort and, of course, a lot of money and input, but the value that's come back to me to be able to experience the wholeness that I am now, it was worth much more than I spent, although it was, $250,000. And now I'm sharing this with you in the hope and the knowledge that you too will be the game changers, the life changers. This new generation, all you millennials and especially, or you of any age or background or religion or culture, you can be a stalwart, strong, courageous hero, heroine in your own world and in your own culture and in the world at large. It's only been a few dozen people who've changed the history of the world for hundreds of thousands of years, and you know them all. And they are the spiritual masters who went through this great process to understand how to deal with all the differing aspects, the light and the dark within themselves. This is the key to human mastery and spiritual mastery and life's meaningful fulfillment. Now, just a little addendum here at the end of this, in a way, because though I've said psychologically, and it is a truth, that the origin of evil and warfare and murder and the breakdown of society and the destruction of society, which happens over and over again in regular cycles, often in 80-year cycles, 120-year cycles, sometimes less than that, if we look at all the wars in the last 200 or 300 years. Though evil does originate in our seemingly so far historic inability to see and deal with constructively the inner aggression and the death wish of ourself and other people around us, we can also see that evil comes from other places. That's my experience as a social and cultural anthropologist and living in different cultures of the world and studying them, and also as a psychologist. What are these other elements of evil that I'm speaking of? Well, there are cultural, historical evils. So there's whole archetypal energy fields or presences, if you were, in different tribes or ethnic groups or nations or religion against opposing tribes, ethnic groups, nations, or religions. And we can go back and just point some out historically. I'm not fingering any, particularly the Jews and the Christians, the Jews and the Muslims, um, various different tribes that have been fighting them as neighbors, whether the First Nations in the three Americas or in Africa with all the different tribes there as well. This is just showing us that this is actually a truth. It's part of human nature. But this evil grows and grows and grows over time as a cultural evil. And, in the case of Rwanda and so on, with the Hutus and the Tutsis and so on, I'm just throwing out different examples here. This evil comes back to haunt us over and over and gets more vicious and violent and deadly and genocidal every time we don't deal with this. And apart from that, strictly on a spiritual level, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience and also from the experience of all the different uh, peoples I've worked with, there is another extant evil, which seems to be a spiritual entities that also exist. Where they come from is a good question. That's something I've done a lot of research on, and I'm not going into it here. But there are other entities that are spiritual disembodied entities, and I'm not talking about ghosts here. These are entities that do exist in the cosmos and in the solar system that have something to do with our history and our ancestry here on planet Earth. Whole other story, lots of different videos to come. The key is this, and here's the point, and here's the solution. Get to know yourself. Know thyself is what Plato and Socrates and all the great philosophers have said. Study the philosophy of evil. Study the structure of the personality. Read some Jungian psychology. There's lots of 2 essays on analytical psychology. Great book by Carl Jung. There's lots of books you can read on this. Go online. There's lots of free information. But seriously, take the fact that just start to engage in the process of shadow resurrection, in the sense of look at your shadow, transform it, get to know it. As I've said previously in the video of part 1 of this, it is the source of life. It's the source of all energy and vitality, the source of all creativity, the source of your inner child, the source of your joy, and absolutely the source of your purpose and meaning as a wonderfully rich human being, where everything will be meaningful for you, symbolic and deeply meaningful for you. Everything will turn into riches for you. It will give you a renewed passion for life and maybe set you off in a whole new direction in your life pattern, in your life gift, and your life business, and what you go into. I'm hoping a lot of you will learn a lot about this kind of psychology, not necessarily the bland psychology taught in university, which knows nothing about the true nature of the human being as a divine human animal. Anyways, lots more videos to come. I wish you well. I wish you all peace and all joy as you hold together the opposites in you. That's where the great energy will come flowing all the way up through you and revitalize you, keep you young, keep you youthful, keep you always on an adventure, keep you enjoying the truth and the authenticity of being the beautiful you and the love that you are. Dr. Joseph Martin, Om Namah Shivaya, all love and blessings.